Thank you all for joining us tonight for the U.S.PLHIV Caucus Member Orientation Engagement Webinar. This is Tammy Hott, co-managing or co-executive director of the CERO project. And CERO is the anchor network that is coordinating the membership engagement committee. So we want to welcome you all. This webinar will be recorded for those not able to join us today. And I want to welcome tonight's presenters. We have, I didn't check to see if Martha was able to join us. Martha is the caucus's co-chair. She was flying and wasn't sure if she was going to have internet access. We have Ronald Johnson, who is the chair of the caucus. Vanita Ray is the caucus treasurer. Malcolm Reed is the Policy Action Committee chair and a representative with Thrive SS. And then Nana Khanna is the executive director of PWN, and PWN is the coordinator of the Federal Strategies Committee. And with that, I will turn the, oh, nope, I'm sorry, I have one more slide. Just wanted to share some of what we are going to be talking about tonight. Just briefly touching on the caucus history, who the caucus is, and we will be discussing the committees. And they have changed since the caucus went through a strategic plan. So we have the Federal Strategy Committee, Policy Action Committee, Membership Committee, Communications Committee, and Fiscal Oversight Committee. And we will provide more details and also provide details of how you can become a member of the committees that are open to members. And then there are subcommittees or work groups under the Federal Strategy Committee that we will also uplift. So you can find out what those committees and work groups do as well. With that, I will turn this over to who we are, to either Martha or Ronald, and I apologize for not seeing if Martha was able to join us from the plane. I am not seeing her, so Ronald, if you wouldn't mind leading these slides, I would appreciate it.
Certainly. Thank you, Tammy, and thank everyone for joining us on this membership orientation. Who are we? The U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus, otherwise known as the HIV Caucus or the Caucus, is a group of organizations, coalitions, networks or client groups of people living with HIV and individual advocates living with HIV. Collectively, the caucus strives to speak with a unified voice for people living with HIV in the United States. The HIV Caucus believes in and is predicated upon the principles of self-empowerment and self-determination, as those ideas are embodied in the Denver Principles, the 40th anniversary of which we celebrated just 2 weeks ago, and the greater involvement of people living with HIV, or MIPA, and the meaningful involvement of people living with HIV and AIDS, MIPA. All members, including representatives of institutions, as well as individual advocates, must be individuals living with HIV. The types of membership that we have are institutions, organizations, coalitions, networks, or client groups are eligible as organizational members. We also have individual members who are not affiliated with an organization or network. For example, I am an individual member of the caucus. And all members, as I said, are people living with HIV. Next slide. What you have is you see the steering committee composition. Okay. Why we came together. We came together in about 2010 to, with the resolution of NAPWA, and we realized, many of us realized, that there was no national voice for people living with HIV. So in 2010, a group of people living with HIV, activists and networks, formed the caucus. As an informal collaboration to create that collective voice for people living with HIV. The caucus was organized, and we recognize the importance of people living with HIV establishing our own agenda and our priorities, setting forth leadership we have chosen, and speaking with that collective voice. Next slide. The caucus is governed by a steering committee, and we'll be talking more about the steering committee. And a key part of the steering committees, and this was part of a strategic planning process that we went over the last 2 years, 21 and 22, really delving into the structure and governance of the caucus and the steering committee, and anchor networks, which serve as collectively kind of the trustees and base of the organization of the caucus and steering committee. And currently there are 7 anchor networks. Their logos are on the screen, and 8 members of organizations and individual advocates. So 7 anchor networks and 8 members that are either representatives of organizations or individual advocates. And as the committee, it elects and selects its officers. There are 4 officer roles: the chair, the vice chair, the secretary, and the treasurer. Next slide. The current steering committee members are on the screen, as you see, with myself, a individual member I serve as the chair of the steering committee. Martha Cameron, who hopefully will be joining us, but she is in transit, is the vice chair, and Vanita Ray as treasurer, and Kamaria Laffrey is our secretary. And then you see the other representatives, either individual advocates or representatives of organizations and anchor networks. Next slide. The steering committee and the caucus itself is currently an all volunteer organization. We have no paid staff. Ebony Turk, who is on the screen on the right, serves under contract and helps with our administration and communications, playing an invaluable role in helping us stay organized and our communications flowing. But as I said, the caucus otherwise is an all volunteer force, and we all pitch in to do the work of the caucus. And with that, I will turn it back to Tammy.
Thank you so much, Ronald, and sorry about that. When I advanced the slide, it advanced a couple, so I threw you off for a second. But now we will pass it on to Vanita, who's going to share about the importance of networks and some of the key programs of the caucus. Benita, if you're speaking, you are on mute.
I am, and I can't even remember how brilliant that was. So you all have to excuse me, but I was just seeing something that Jose was writing in the chat about Spanish interpretation, and they have included a number and that they're willing to do that with. So thank you, Jose, for that. But my name is Benita. Thank you all for being here. This is really exciting to see this many of y'all here. As you saw on one of the previous slides, I am a representative for PWN, who is one of the 7 anchor networks. And so I think Ronald kind of alluded to why we are here. We formed in 2010, and what pushed it was that was the year that the National HIV/AIDS strategy was coming out, and there was no way for a collective voice to give feedback and input to that at these federal tables. And folks at the time, Vanessa Johnson, Wahida Shabazel, and so many others really began to think about Sean Stroop, how do we form something to have a collective voice for people living with HIV in the US? And so, and then some of that rose out of the Denver principles as well. So we wanted for people living with HIV to define our own agenda. The way that it tends to happen with these other folks, they'll pick one of us over here and one over there. We don't have a collective agenda. We just got individuals serving and not representing the collective of all of us. So it will enable us to define our own agenda, so we know what we want to move at those tables. We can determine our own priorities. We can't depend on an agency, government, or organizations led by non-folks living with HIV to really understand what our priorities are and what our agenda is. We wanted to be able to select our own leadership. If you look at the Denver principles, it says we have the right to choose and form our own caucuses and for those who represent us. And so usually these processes, you know, they'll pick one here, pick one there, but it doesn't allow us to have that collective voice and that leadership chosen by us, for us at these tables. And so at the end of the day, the caucus wants to fill this role, but we want to have a collective voice, because y'all know power in numbers. Where we lack money, we can make up in numbers. We were striving for a collective voice for people living with HIV. Next slide. So it's all about power. It's all about getting our needs met. It's all about running our own agenda, picking our own leaders, developing our own leadership, and getting our needs met by us, for us. And so the call to action to expose and challenge the lack of MIPA, meaningful involvement in, I told you all about this. You know, we had our first national HIV/AIDS strategy being created without a collective voice. You know, they might get some feedback from a person here, a person there, but we really had no way to really build power and move our agenda and make sure our needs were getting met in the national HIV/AIDS strategy. So this network, the caucus, was launched and has worked to represent people living with HIV at these federal tables. And I'll talk about some of the ways that we do this through leadership development and focused strategic action, and again, running some programs even without a staff. So we, I wasn't one of them, but the people at the time took up that call to action and formed the caucus to enable us to organize, mobilize, and be that representative. So next slide, please. So some of the programs that the caucus does and has done for a while, and I hope y'all realize this when I finish, that we do this with no staff, is that the caucus is one of the key partners with the annual AIDS Watch, you know, the annual day once a year where we all descend on the Capitol and lobby around a set of priorities. So the caucus sits at that table, is a key partner. We work to do the policy briefs that you all do. We make sure that, you know, we have representatives. We may help in the scholarships. We may help in different things to make sure that AIDS Watch comes off and is heavily influenced by people living with HIV, in addition to the reception that we also organize. And the what used to be the Positive Leadership Awards is now the Marco Castro Borges Award. We also do that at AIDS Watch, and we make that selection. Next slide. We are also also, and I hope some of you are on here who were just at HINAC, but we're also one of the networks that helped to put on for the last couple of years. The HIV is not a crime training academy. And so we're an active partner in that. And we actively work to dismantle and end the structural violence that HIV criminalization represents by participating as a partner in HINAC and also by running some of our own program that I'll talk about in a minute. And then one of the other things that the caucus has done for a while is we are a partner with AIDS United to provide technical assistance under their People Organizing Positively program, or POP program, some of you know by. And we have done that for the past 4 years, and we provide the coaches to organizations that have been selected as grantees and ensure that they get paid. And we typically contract that out and ensure we get involved in some of the work that leads up to the implementation and to the launching of the People Organizing Positively grant program as well. So we provide technical assistance on that in the form of coaches and other administrative support. Next slide. So one of the large things that we've been doing for the last couple of years is we are part of one of the partners in the Health Not Prison Collective. This is a multi-year effort with partners of Positive Women's Network, the Counter Narrative, Transgender Law Center, and the Zero Project, where we are united against the policing, prosecution, and imprisonment of public health issues. And we're committed to the abolition of the carceral state. And that goes from HIV criminalization to sex work to immigration, the way immigration is dealt with in detention centers. So it is not just one focus on HIV criminalization, because we recognize that most of the people that are impacted by HIV are dealing with these other structural forms of oppression and used where the criminalization of sex work, criminalization of people living with HIV, and the broad range of things. And we do that by providing many grants and other kinds of webinars and community education around criminalization, and work with our partners to do that. And so really love that we have been working on this for a couple years now. Next slide. Am I finished? Okay. Now, one of the big things I think we're really proud of, and it's almost been the year anniversary in July, and I don't know what date, mid-July, where the caucus with our anchor networks developed, drafted, and produced the first policy agenda written by and for people living with HIV to inform the federal government's HIV response. It's called Demanding Better. It's the HIV federal policy agenda by people living with HIV. And I hope some of you all will go take a look at this and the executive summary, but we are in constant communication with federal folks and trying to get some of the recommendations that we included in Demanding Better, but really important document. You all, I hope, even if whatever you do, you download it and start, reading it and talking about it in your own local jurisdictions. But huge effort, very proud of it. We got a year anniversary coming up, so stay tuned for a little bit more information about that. And the last thing, and Ronald alluded to this, is we just celebrated the 40th year of the Denver Principles. And if you're on here and don't know what the Denver Principles are, please go to the caucus's website. No shame, just now you can know. But the 40th year, where on June 12th, the caucus put on a community event acknowledging the 40 years. And if you were on there, it was powerful. And then we also worked with our partners Ribbon to do a congressional briefing, and we gave some community leadership awards, including some of our congressional leaders and some of our community leaders. We were able to also feature one of the last living original drafter of the Denver Principles. So huge effort. We have to decide where we want to take this and how the Denver Principles need to evolve to speak to us today, but a seminal document in the HIV self-empowerment movement. So really proud of that. And I think that's all for me.
That is, thank you so much, Vanita, for sharing the key projects of the caucus and the necessity of networks of people living with HIV. We're now going to turn it over to Malcolm, who is going to share information on some of the key committees of the caucus: the Policy Action Committee, Membership Engagement Committee, Strategic Communications, and Fiscal Committee. So thank you, Malcolm.
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Vanita and Ronald. So I'm here to talk about the caucus committee. So you've heard what the caucus does, and now we're going to get into how we do it. And so we have various committees, and I'm not going to say that we break up into committees. I'm going to say that we have committees that collaborate on getting this work done. So the first committee that I'll talk about is the Policy Action Committee. I am the chair of the Policy Action Committee, and we'll talk more about what each committee does in the current slides. Next is the Federal Strategy Committee. Nana, Martha, and Kamaria are the co-chairs of that committee. And then we have the Member Engagement Committee that Tammy Hart chairs, and then the Fiscal Committee with Vanita and Ronald, and then the Communications Committee with Agnes, Victoria, and Eric. Next slide, please. So the Policy Action Committee is formerly known as the Federal Policy Committee. We're a vital component of the caucus. And again, I'm honored to be the committee's chair. We play a crucial role in shaping the policy and advocating for the civil and human rights of individuals living with HIV. And our main priority is developing and the composition of the Civil and Human Rights Policy Brief for AIDS Watch, a prominent advocacy event in the United States, as Vanita just mentioned. And so we do the policy brief, the AIDS Watch fact sheets, planning and scholarship. We work with with AIDS United and the other AIDS Watch planning partners to review the scholarship applications. And this year we will also be reviewing the abstracts for AIDS Watch. We also have actions to engage people living with HIV in policy discussion and decisions at a state and federal level. So I know that previous to this slide, we've been really talking about federal policy, and Demanding Better is a document about federal policy. However, what we've seen with the anti-trans bills and the other things that are going on at the state level, we felt that it was very, very important for the caucus for people living with HIV to have a voice in their states. Many states have a statewide AIDS Watch or statewide policy day. And so what we like to do is work with those states to make sure that we're all singing out of the same hymn book and talking and advocating for the same changes in the laws. We meet on the second Wednesday of every month at 6 p.m. for 1 hour. And then if we have something pressing, then we'll work with the team to schedule any other ad hoc meetings as necessary. Next slide, please. And so the next committee is the Member Engagement Committee. Tammy is the chair of the Member Engagement Committee, and it is coordinated by the Zero Project. You are on this call because of Tammy and the Zero Project's hard work in engaging members. If you were at AIDS Watch in Washington in April, then you probably scanned the QR code, and that might be why you're here. And so the Member Engagement Committee coordinates orientation of members, but also has two additional roles: coordinating listening sessions and member input, and in making and implementing plans to support the growth of the people living with HIV networks. And that would be coordinated by the Zero Project. Right now, there's no scheduled meeting for the member engagement team, but Tammy will be sending out a doodle poll to engage most of you. Next slide, please. Next, we have the Strategic Communications Committee. How would the caucus function if nobody knew what we were here? And so we have a great communications committee that is the voice of the caucus. It works with other committees to highlight and promote all of our priority issues. Their job is to inform members and the general public about the work of the caucus, reintroduce the caucus to members, lead quarterly webinars to engage caucus members, ensure our website is updated, and create a newsletter via blogs and social media. The co-chairs are Victoria, Siciliano, Agnes, and Agnes, I don't want to butcher your name, so I'm just going to say Agnes, and you can come off mute and tell everybody how you pronounce your name. And then Eric as well. And so these people are responsible for making sure that our voices are heard to the public and to the community, making sure that you know exactly what the caucus is doing. Next slide, please. And finally, we have the fiscal committee. The fiscal committee is responsible for the fundraising and the fiscal management of the caucus. As was stated, we are a volunteer organization. And so we don't have a lot of salaries to pay, but the work that we do is expensive. We do things that make sure that people are living the lives that they want to live, thriving the way that they want to live, and that work does not come cheap. And so we do have grant funding, and some of that grant funding is parsed out through the caucus, and we make it and into different areas to help with our programming. And so the fiscal committee is an important part of the caucus. And we also depend on the anchor networks to help us with some of that work as well. Next slide.
Oops, sorry. And there I go, advancing more slides than I needed to. Thank you so much, Malcolm, for uplifting some of the key committees of the
and
caucus.
Tammy, there was one thing that I did forget to mention, that you guys are on this to become potential members of the caucus, and we do encourage you to find out what these committees are doing and encourage you to join the Policy Action Committee, the Member Engagement Committee, Communications, or the Federal Strategies Committee, any one of those committees that you want to. And we're not opposed to you joining as many as you want to. We are, again, a volunteer organization, so we need people that are that really want to get involved and get engaged. And so you can join one or as many committees as you'd like. Thanks, Tammy.
Thank you, Malcolm. Appreciate you so much. And now we're going to turn it over to Nana, who's going to talk about the Federal Strategy Committee and then the subcommittees and work groups from the Federal Strategy Committee. So thank you, Nana.
Hey, y'all. Thank you all so much for being here. And thank you to the caucus and my colleagues and comrades at the caucus for the incredible organizing on this webinar. So I'm Nana Khanna, they or she pronouns with Positive Women's Network. As Vanita mentioned, we're one of the anchor organizations of the U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus. And we're really proud to be a part of the U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus. We believe that the work of the caucus is critical to making sure that the voices, perspectives, priorities of the 1.2 million estimated people living with HIV are really reflected at all levels of decision-making in this country. And so I have the privilege of co-chairing one of the committees of the U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus, the Federal Strategy Committee, along with the amazing Kamaria Laffrey from Zero Project, and Martha Cameron, who's with National Working Positive Coalition and ICW North America. And the three of us work together to basically co-chair this committee that focuses on elevating priorities of people living with HIV in national policy issues. So we do that because we know that nobody is coming to do this work for us. And we believe that it's powerful for all the networks of people living with HIV and for diverse communities of people living with HIV to come together and say, you know, how is the domestic HIV response at the national level? How is it meeting our priorities? Is it meeting our priorities? What needs to happen with issues and programs that are impacting our communities, from the Brian White program to looking at HOPWA to the National HIV/AIDS Strategy, the Ending the HIV Epidemic Plan? If these programs aren't really working for people living with HIV, then who are they working for, right? So, so we really come together to kind of analyze different priorities, policy issues, to recommend positions for the caucus to take. We advocate, so we do meetings, we create materials like the Demanding Better agenda that Vinita showed you earlier. That was basically a collective policy agenda created by many different people living with HIV to uplift our collective priorities. We create materials like that. We create talking points for people to talk to their legislators, elected officials, decision makers, members of Congress. We do meetings with the administration and different agencies like CDC and HRSA and the Office of National AIDS Policy to really uplift different kinds of priorities on behalf of people living with HIV. And we analyze when things come out like the National HIV/AIDS Strategy or the Ending the Epidemic Plan, or a new funding opportunity request comes out from an agency that's going to impact services and programs for people living with HIV. We read through those, we analyze them, we talk about them to figure out what the implications will be. And so Positive Women's Network, as one of the anchor organizations of the caucus, kind of like staffs and coordinates a lot of the work of the Federal Strategy Committee. And we're going to show you some of the areas that we're working on the next slide. So we can go to the next slide, please. So the caucus really works to uplift voices of people living with HIV in areas that we don't think other organizations or communities, maybe where we think more support could be needed, or where our voices can make a difference. So this is by no means an exhaustive list of all the issues that affect people living with HIV. These are issues, this is a range of issues that we have chosen and selected because we think that these are the issues that we can collectively make a difference on. So Shakina, thank you for that question. I'm going to get to that in just a second. So the work of the Federal Strategy Committee actually happens through all these different subcommittees that are open to any people living with HIV. And the subcommittees work on these specific issues. So some of the issues that we're really prioritizing are meaningful involvement of people living with HIV. So this is like at a policy level, how do we structure in meaningful involvement of people living with HIV into the whole response? So for example, if your Ryan White Planning Council requires a certain percentage of participation by people living with HIV or directly impacted community members, how can we get similar requirements to that in different aspects of the domestic policy response, right? So those are some of the things we look at. We work to end molecular HIV surveillance because this is an invasive practice that takes our data without our consent and creates vulnerability for criminalization and prosecution. We work to uplift quality of life for people living with HIV. You might know that historically, in the National HIV/AIDS Strategy and the Ending the HIV Epidemic Response, usually they've defined success for people living with HIV by our viral loads, by our CD4 counts, and by how many clinic visits we had. And we know, as people living with HIV, that doesn't actually describe how well we're doing. So we advocated as a caucus to get a new indicator in the National HIV/AIDS Strategy that was called quality of life for people living with HIV. So we want the government to be accountable for measuring how are we actually doing? How's our housing? How's our food security? Do we have enough food to eat? Is it nutritious food? Do we have access to mental health services? Do we have access to employment opportunities? All these different types of things. So that's what the Quality of Life Committee works on, is making sure that those that there's accountability for those different things that really measure a better quality of life for us than just our biomedical data. Status neutral. This is another issue that the caucus has been working on a lot. You might have heard a lot about status neutral responses. We think that there are some opportunities in status neutral approaches to programming, and we think that there are also some challenges and concerns that we need to make sure are addressed, like making sure that if a program changes from serving only people living with HIV and expands to serving other communities beyond that, we need to make sure that there's no loss of services, quality of services, or quantity of services for people living with HIV. We know that our communities already have a lot of unmet needs. So that's what that committee works on. Decriminalization. This is an issue that that the caucus works on a lot, decriminalization of HIV, and really making sure that the voices, perspectives, and priorities of people living with HIV, especially BIPOC folks, Black, Indigenous people of color living with HIV, are reflected in those spaces, and that the national response is addressing this. We can't, you can't test and treat our way out of the HIV epidemic if we're not creating a human rights environment that actually supports us to be who we are. And to live and love as we choose. And then the employment subcommittee is another area. And this is a body of work that has really been led by National Working Positive Coalition and others. And you can see the chairs of each of these subcommittees on here, but the employment working group basically works to expand employment opportunities for people living with HIV through policy work at the federal level primarily. So we're going to show you on the next slide a Google form that you can fill out to be added to any of these lists. All of these subcommittees meet about once a month, and they also do other work in between. And you can see the chairs of each of these committees there. So this slide here, go ahead and take a picture of it, scan this QR code, and let us know if you want to join one of these subcommittees and get active on fighting for the rights and services and protections and healthcare and justice for people living with HIV. We would love to have you join us. So I'll stop there, but please do get that QR code and go ahead and sign up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nana. And as Dawn put in the chat, that's a lot of work. And thankfully, working together and collaborating together, the caucus does do a lot of work. And just to let everyone know, all of these links that are being shared in the chat box, we will send it out with the recording to everyone who registered, so that you have all of the links along with this link to join a committee of the caucus. So Ronald, I didn't know if you wanted to go on with this or if you wanted me to take the last few slides.
No, Tammy, I'll chime in. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you.
As I said earlier, the steering committee serves as the organizing governing body for the caucus. And as I also pointed out, we at the steering committee went through a lengthy 2-year strategic planning process, looking at ourselves, looking at the caucus. How do we strengthen ourselves so that we can be that strong collective voice of people living with HIV? And part of that process was, well, how do we reinvigorate? How do we make sure that the steering committee continues to grow and revolve with new members? And so we developed a process for joining the steering committee. And over the next few weeks, we will invite applications from current caucus members, organizational and network members, as well as individual independent advocates for open seats on the steering committee. And so that invitation will go out in the next month or so, a few weeks, and to solicit nominations from the membership, which is why it's so important to join the caucus. We will be inviting nominees for the steering committee. The membership committee, which was described earlier by Malcolm, will review the applications and prepare a slate of nominations for the open steering committee seats. And the current steering committee will select individuals, organizations, or networks to serve on the steering committee. And much of that will be based on ensuring the demographic, geographic diversity of the steering committee, to make sure that the steering committee fully reflects the membership of the caucus and fully reflects the diversity of those of us who are living with HIV. And hopefully that the new steering committee will start its meetings in January of 24. So we have this process for making sure that the steering committee continues to be refreshed with new people, new ideas, new perspectives to further ensure that the caucus is in fact the collective and strong voice of people living with HIV. Next slide. And that means we need to look at our commitment to you, the members of the caucus. We will host a webinar at least three times a year. So organizational members will have an opportunity to share what they are doing and provide actions that people can do and advocate over the next 3 to 6 months, and including you in committee meetings and calls that was just gone over by Nana and Malcolm. It's very important. We need that two-way street, and that is our commitment, the steering committee's commitment to you, the members, to make sure that we are in touch with you, you are in touch with us, that the membership is totally involved in the thinking and forming the thinking and the perspectives of the caucus, either in a webinar or through the committee works. We need to make sure that we are, in fact, you are, in fact, the voice of people living with HIV. Next slide. And I think I'll turn it back to you, Tammy.
Thank you so much, Ronald. So we wanted to provide you with some opportunity to provide input today and later on this week as you get this information. But here is a community survey that the caucus has created to gather community feedback on the issues which are most important to you. So please scan that code. And like I said, these links will be included in the notes document after the webinar is over and we have the recording link. But please fill that out because your voice, like we said, collectively our voices have so much power, so we need to know what is important to you so we can uplift it through the steering committee. Also, one thing that we ask, and I don't know why it keeps skipping slides, is for our anchor networks and organizational networks to provide opportunities to caucus members. So here's one that Sarah released today. It is time for applications for the new Sarah Project Justice Institute. So here's the information on that. One thing that I didn't get added today, the Positive Women's Network also released a opportunity for education through one of their programs. So we'll make sure that we include that in the notes. But we just, all of the anchor networks and organizational members in the steering committee want to provide opportunities to engage the community, to provide educational opportunities, but to also hear the voices of everyone in the community. And with one of these last slides is the contact information. If you have any questions or concerns, please use this email address, plhivcaucus@gmail.com. And with that, we can take questions. I haven't been able to keep up with the chat box since I'm sharing my screen, but were there any questions in the chat box, Ebony, that should be lifted up? But first, let's thank all of our presenters, Vanita, Ronald, Malcolm, Nana. Thank you all so much for sharing about the caucus and the programs that we lead.
I don't see any questions in the chat box, but if someone has one, you can drop it in the chat or you can come off mute and ask it, but we only want one question at a time, so we're not talking over each other.
Ebenezer, I see there's a question about whether we have a mentoring program. Currently, we don't have an organized mentoring program. I think that, however, is a good idea, but I think immediately that mentoring process and opportunity is through the committees and involving in the committees, the Policy Action Committee, for example, in its work for AIDS Watch, the Federal Strategies Committee and the subcommittees, status neutral, molecular HIV surveillance, decriminalization. I think those are themselves mentoring processes, and through the involvement and work and teaming up with fellow advocates, I think that in and of itself can perform a very important mentoring role, although we don't have at the moment a formal mentoring process. As I said, I think the involvement in the committees and the subcommittees can itself be a mentoring function.
And I would say that whoever asked that question, Nana dropped some other ideas, the Zero Positive Justice Project, the PWN Policy Fellowship, they take folks, the HNP Health Not Prison Advocate Program. So there's other ways just getting connected that you will see, that you will be mentored. There's no way to do this in community that you won't be mentored.
I will even add that every meeting with any of the subcommittees or anybody in the caucus is a learning experience. I've been with the caucus since 2018, and I can't remember a time that I didn't join a call that I didn't learn something that I didn't already know, and the knowledge that the caucus represents is astounding. We have people, from Zero Project, Sean Strube, who was, an advocate way back right after the Denver Principles. And so we talk to people every day who have been doing this work for the 40 years and just learning from them, and then engaging young people and new advocates and training them. Sometimes the best way to learn something is to train. And one of the things that we do at AIDS Watch is we do new advocate training. And we find out how people learn and how people want to engage in the process, young, new advocates, so with fresh ideas. So all of that is very, very important. So come on board, join us, help us. We've got a lot of work to do. And if you watch the news, we got a lot of people to fight. So we're definitely here to do that work.
Thank you, Malcolm. Nana answered this in the chat, but I want to say it out loud in case other people have this question. Do you have to be a steering committee member to be on a subcommittee?
No.
Not on a subcommittee. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ronald.
Go ahead, Tammy.
Not on a subcommittee and not on the Policy Action Committee or the Membership Committee or Communications Committee. And those options will be on that Google form with the link that we sent to you, which committees are open to caucus members. So we ask you to please look at that form and join the committee that you're most interested in, or as Malcolm said, more than one, and to become involved, and just to find out if you want to stay involved in that committee work.
So there are a lot of suggestions in the chat. PWM put their link in the chat about a series that's starting next week. So please check that out if you can. The committee link is in the chat. If you want to go ahead and click on that and look to see, you don't have to fill it out right now. You could just look at it, think about it. We'll send it out later as well. Any other questions? There's an amazing session happening at PWN tomorrow. That link is in the chat as well. All right, any final words, Tammy? Doesn't look like there's any other questions.
Once again, thanking all of the presenters for tonight's webinar, and thanking all of you for joining us. And we look forward to working with you on a committee or subcommittee. Together, our voices, we can make a difference, I believe, which is why we do this work. So thank you all for joining us tonight, and please sign up for a group, our committee, so you can join us in work later on.
Oh, Tammy, there's one important thing we did not say. If you are not a member, fill out the application on the website to become a member. Even if you've been a member, I'm talking with no face, I'm sorry. If you've been a member and you haven't filled out our new application, please go and fill out our new application because we have some new processes. So please go to the website. I'll make sure it's in the chat. Fill out an application. There are multiple there. We even have a Spanish one there. And become a member if you're not one. And even if you are already a member, please re-sign up if you can. Sorry about that. Thank you, Tammy.
Great catch, Ebony. Thank you.
All right. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Have a great night.
Bye-bye, everyone.